an environmental activist and a photographer to present his portrait.
Thank you, Dinesh. Prashant, fantastic you pulled this off, this huge event. Congratulations to you and thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry I was traveling till today morning, so I don't have a special, I have a presentation which I've used recently. That's not maybe specifically for this audience, so do pardon if I sort of, there are some images and there are some conversations. This is what interests me right now. Maybe you can dim the lights. So this is what interests, this is where I land up with what I do. And I use these words specifically because, in a sense, photography also led me back to what I was interested in, or sort of focused me in what I was thinking. So it's like a companion. I'll just take you to some bodies of work I've done over the last 2-3 decades. And this is chronological. This series of works was done on the street. It was done pre-94, and it was just what first drew me to photography when I was very young. I was interested in shooting the street like a classical street photographer, wrap the camera around the wrist and walk the street, and try to make visual sense of what's going on outside. Most of it's very spontaneous work, and it was first, and I found myself focusing a lot on street and people who are working on the street. And a lot of these images, though I have only 4 of them here, deal with that kind of subject. And this is also when I started having a deeper involvement in what was a big debate at that time of color or black and white. I think the debate sort of died down now. But at that time it was sort of a big thing of where you do color. The first thing you ask, do you color or do you black and white? So I did color then. This actually led to my first show in '94 called Street View. It was a body of about 50 photographs taken over the last 10 years, which were shown there. It was also, I just showed this picture to show what Dinesh already mentioned, that I also became involved in environmental issues because of some campaigns I got involved in, and this is just an image to show the other side of life, which sort of mixes and merges with what I do. The subsequent body of work, and many of my bodies of work take 2, 3, 4 years sometimes. This was the longest of 4 years. Often they take over 2 years to do. This is a body of work done on migrant labor. It was done in association with an anthropologist who had done a lot of work on internal migration of labor in the country. It finally got published as a book called Down and Out, Laboring Under Global Capitalism. Oxford University Press printed that. And this was a fascinating 4-year-long journey of looking at labor, internal migration of labor. It was also the time when the rural countryside in India was changing post-liberalization. A lot of the rural areas were becoming industrialized. A lot of what was called agriculture was actually industrial. For example, sugarcane was really industrial activity, though it was still agriculture, but in real terms industrial. And there was a lot of people who were coming into cities for work, finding different kinds of work in large numbers. And most of them were people who were landless, the poorest of the poor, and still support majority of the sort of the workforce. 90% of the workforce in India comes from this place. Any body of work like this cannot be done without a certain degree of involvement with the community, with the people there. And it took so long because it was just not possible to do any faster. For example, the photograph on the upper right side is in a sweatshop, which is a diamond cutting sweatshop in Surat, which is a mafia-run place. And just to get access to shooting to places like this meant that you had to have the community inside, the workers had to invite you. And so it was only through the collaboration and aid of workers who I was photographing, and I often ended up spending a lot of time and making friends amongst them. That such a body of work was possible because it took me inside many kinds of sites, work sites. I documented sites of various kinds of labor like construction work, sand dredging, street work, diamond cutting, sugarcane, the specific kinds of work which drew people into the city or had connections with the city. This is about, the book had about 150 photographs. The collaboration was, in a sense, because Jan Bremen, the anthropologist who invited me to do the book, has written extensively, researched extensively on migrant labor. But after he invited me, then it was really something which I had to do. So it wasn't meant like it was, there was a text I was working to, but the text came after the book was produced. So it was essentially a photo book on the understanding, common understanding we had of the situation. This body of work, which actually I had not shown till a couple of months back, was done in 2000, between 2001 and 2002. This is particularly interesting for me because this is a community which lives on the outskirts of Delhi, in a place called Bhati Mines. You probably know the place. This community was displaced by the forest laws which I was involved in pushing for, which meant that large parts of the forest became legally protected, and then anybody, especially the poor who lived there, were asked to move out. And this was one of the communities which were asked to move out, and then they invited me to photograph them. And I spent a year doing that, and as usual, that your connections become long and long-lasting. And the way I work is, I also have a tendency to find out, what else is happening, what are the archival materials they have, and this is just a glimpse of the archival materials which I found from them. The letter is a found photograph of the mining days to do. This was a mining community which used to mine in the quarries till the I think early 80s, and then they were closed. The mines were closed down because of environmental laws, and then subsequently they found jobs. And you still see them around in things like laying internet cables, digging basements, digging ponds. So anywhere you find people digging basements, you'll find probably somebody from Bhati Mines, the community there. But we also got involved in taking them to the Supreme Court, and so till now they are still there. They haven't moved out, and hopefully they'll stay there. The next body of work which I want to share with you is a work which I did between 2004 and 2006. It's when I started getting involved, my practice started changing a bit. The images started having fewer and fewer people, and the ideas of labor became, or of what was happening became more obvious. So this body of work, some 4 of which you see here, are photographs along the riverbank, and I derived the name. I also got involved because I was doing environmental work. I got involved in thinking about why there's so much degradation, and it led me to some texts. And the name actually is from writing by early Marx, which he calls about alienation of fish, because if you pollute the waters with industrial pollutants, the fish becomes alienated to its own water, that means its own body. And it's the first writing he does before he subsequently develops into his alien theory of labor. And this image you see here is subsequently called a performance. I was not involved in performance work, but it's basically an image which meant a lot to me. It was the last image I did in this book. After that, I stopped doing this particular work. It's actually a self-portrait in a shroud, and for me it signified the idea of, it was called emergence, immersion emergence, and it signified the idea of cycles, of the mythical cycles of water, water as a metaphor for continuity of life. But it was often this work is shown. It was also the time when I started bringing text into my work, and the work is often been shown with images and text written on the wall somewhere, and that practice has continued over time. The next thing I want to show you is a residency I was involved in, which was looking at the river again. I was invited to a residency, but I started looking at the other side of the river, which is the clean part of the river, because earlier work was very dark work, looking at all the junk and degradation. Instantly, the whole landscape has changed. Between 2004 and 2006, where I documented that, it's not visible. It's completely gentrified. It's full of, if you go there, I can't recognize, I can't find a way along the river anymore. It's changed so much. This is a body of work called Have You Seen the Flowers on the River? It consisted of photographs, on-site installations, videos, and it was the first time I was breaking form in practice, looking at photographs in association with text and also with videos and with on-site installation. This photographic series is looking at the marigolds which are grown in the river. If you know the river flows 40 kilometers in the city, only half of which is polluted, visibly polluted. If you go beyond Wazirabad, that's half the river, 20 kilometers, it's a completely rural landscape. And there's farming done, there's livestock, it's unbelievably part of Delhi. This is an economy of flowers which is present there for the last 200 years, where flowers are grown, marigolds are grown without fertilizer or pesticide, and end up in the market, which you see in the second row, second column. It's in Old Delhi. It's a 200-year-old market. This work was site-specific. The bottom right image is of the National Museum of Natural History, which is where the last two vultures are in the city, and they are stuffed. They're a diorama. And I decided to intervene in the museum and the space outside it. The space outside it, which is the Mandi House fly roundabout, is probably the busiest roundabout every evening because it's the corridor. So it consisted of intervening in the museum with my own materials, like the diary I did in 1977 when I was shooting the vultures. And this projection, I spent 6 months trying to find nesting vultures. I found two near Bundi in Rajasthan, and I did a video of them nesting and breeding, and that was placed alongside the stuffed vultures. And around the roundabout, I put these large 40 feet by 20 feet images of, I think the 5 of them, of vultures, and essentially remind the city of what it had lost. And again, it had an essay and a small booklet associating with the work. I'm just going to show you some of the things which I'm sort of experiment with. I'm interested, as I say, in the idea of labor, functional bodies, the idea of the body as the sustainable self, as an ecological idea. So these are some series of work, some two images from a series called Metal Man. And then there's an image which is a diptych surface, I think, about the relationship of structures and the self. And this image and the next one is it's called Scene of Crime. 3 works called Scene of Crime, which are really performative photographs. And this is something I'm currently involved in. It's looking at transitory spaces in Delhi. This image and the one following that is of the old Birla Mills in Delhi, which is now closed. It was closed in the mid-90s. It's the mill where G.D. Birla started. It was the second mill he started, and it's also where he supported Gandhi from. So that's his relationship with Gandhi's entry into politics. was, I think, in the early 20th century, was from this place. And this mill subsequently got closed in the mid 1996, I think, because of environmental laws and this big labor displacement, those some of you might know. And currently, this is now being sold, has been sold to a big developer as a shopping mall. It was a fantastic, beautiful space inside, and ultimately, when I got permission to enter, it was very hard because they were worried that if I take pictures and show them, the site will have heritage value, and they didn't want the site to have heritage value because they're fighting this case at the Supreme Court. So they made me promise I won't show the pictures till the Supreme Court case got settled, which it did 4 months back in their favor. And the stock of the company went up overnight. So that's why it's called Capital in Transition. It's looking at the transition of capital from G.D. Birla's mill to current idea of new capital today. But essentially the space changes. And this was accompanied by a video which was done showing the relationship between Gandhi and Birla on money. Both have written on the idea of money and trusteeship. So that was an interesting sort of idea for me, looking at how capitalists and somebody like Gandhi looks at money. This has this has several spaces. I'm just showing you 2 of them. These 2 I've shown earlier, but there are several other spaces which I've been photographing, which hopefully sometime next year I want to show. And these are just some videos, just to show you some videos I've done. Not too many, just 5 or 6. The Sewage Ponds Memoir is a 2-channel video done on the ecology of water in the village my grandparents came from, and the sewage pond which flows through the rich forest. And I just want to show you my current engagement, which I hope all of you come and see. It's the first public art and outreach project done on the banks of the river. It's being near the old Yamuna Bridge. There's something called the Golden Jubilee Park. It starts on the 9th of November. It's a collaborative project between India and Germany, and I'm one of the co-curators for this with Til Krause, who is the German artist. And essentially, it is based, if you look at the site, this is how the site has progressed. This was the first picture on the left, upper left, was the site in 2004. It's the site of the Yamuna Pushkar demolitions. The right is a little later, and the one below is in 2009. Currently, it looks something like this. So that's the next thing. So please, all of you, come and see on the 9th of November.
Actually, there's some photographs that kind of disturbed me. The ones of the villagers from the forest who had been evicted, right? And you said that you were a part of the forest laws, you were pushing for it, which kind of got them out of the forest. To begin with, I just want to ask, was that the only step, or did you also kind of make other arrangements for them? Because it's always easy to say that there shouldn't be child labor, you kind of stop children from working, but you don't supplement it with employment for the parents. And similarly, did you supplement it with some sort of compensation, some sort of accommodation, some sort of livelihood? Were they, there are like lots of questions. So were they also like belonging to, say, the Adivasi community, where like generations after generation staying there for hundreds of years? Was it a case of people sitting in the cities making laws for people in the villages? Also, did they know that while you're photographing them that you were a part of the process that kind of got them out of the forest? Also the role of an artist and an activist together.
Let me tell you all these things. I understand your question.
Just the last thing was that the role of an artist and an activist, because
I'll try and answer that.
because
I'll share my ideas.
there's an impression of you also being a gallery artist. You know, the whole thing of, I don't know, limited edition artist, but it's different, you know, like, I'm just wondering whether you kind of, um,
I'll answer all these questions. I understand.
Okay.
Thank you for the questions. Very nice. They're still there. Those people haven't moved, so they don't need compensation or housing. They still have the village is still intact because of various campaigns taking the Supreme Court. It's very important for them that people like me support them, because we were earlier pushing for the laws, and when we said these laws are fine, but you cannot displace the community, it became a voice in their favor, because it wasn't the oppositional voice, it was support from the people who had done the laws, or had pushed for the laws. The lawmaking process is a complex process. The reason it happened was because of the way ground maps are drawn or how these laws are made, and it is imperfect and not the way it should be done, but even today there are no boundary markings on the land. So yes, I'm still in touch with them, and that part of your question is fine. They very well knew who I was. That's the reason they invited me, both as a photographer and what I did. So you cannot enter a community and work with them with any degree of dishonesty. It has to be completely honest. In fact, when I was doing down and out, people often used to ask me, so how will your photographs help us? And I said, probably not at all. You know, I don't know how they will help you. And it's a very important question of how images are circulated and what happens to the images. So I think this is a critical question of representation and circulation of images, some of which you have no control over, because how images get circulated you can control in your own realm, but you can't control over the internet or anywhere, or how they're perceived. So many of the references of the images should be in the way the images are taken. I always believe images are more about the photographer than about the photographed, because essentially you're showing the relationship with the subject in the photograph. And somebody else places the camera there, it will be a different photograph. So it's a very personal photograph, and I guess it should somehow be able to read it. In terms of gallery artists, I was designated artist sometime in 2000 after I went to a couple of big shows, and I was invited there. So it is, the way an artist is designated is by somebody designates you an artist. Really does not matter. Essentially, it doesn't, all the art space does to you is give you more space for experimentation. You can do many more things with your ideas, because it has that space for experimentation. You don't have to look at only some kinds of circulation media. You really have that freedom. And the second thing it does is that it brings you in conversation with other kinds of mediums and histories of those mediums. If you're showing along with the painting, sculpture, new media, they all have different histories. And then you have to converse with those histories. So it's a very interesting space. You can see that as a limiting space, but I see it as an expansive state. If you're a photographer or using the visual media, I mean, what's stopping a photographer from picking a video camera or using a 7D or a 5D and doing video? Nothing. I mean, the technology is so interceived now, it flows from one to the other. So also the classical frame has been challenged and broken, and it's not that it's very, very relevant. I think the classical frame is a classical frame, but you're also allowed to then go outside the classical frame. So it's just a possibility of how you choose to experiment with it. I don't think it's anything else. In terms of gallery work, very little work should get shown in the gallery. So if you do a body of work and 3 pictures become limited editions, that's really nothing. And maybe one of those limited editions might sell. So essentially, all my life I've worked as a photographer. Nobody's paid me to do anything. It's just been out of your own self. So only of recent that some photographs sell. And photography is it's not like painting. It sells for 40 lakhs or 60 lakhs. It sells for very little money. So I think these are all, one should see them as opportunities. And I don't want to sort of, you shouldn't define yourself as gallery or anything. I don't think you should play to the gallery. I think you should see as any space as a possibility and your own experimentation space. I do what I used to do, the same way I used to do it. Now I can make a much larger print and show it in the gallery space and not pay for showing it. Otherwise, I don't know how to show that.
No, the only reason I asked was because I think, at least as far as I heard it, you left it just as the forest laws were to take the people out and you were a part of it and you left it at that, and I think that's what
so I said in the talk that we took them to the Supreme Court and they were...
Okay. I think I just got stuck at that, and that's why...
My involvement in this issue is long term. I've been doing this for 17 years, and So, I mean, it's a very fair question to ask, so don't feel that you should.
Thank you for answering.
Hello. Why did you choose to do this constructive work using mannequins? What message you take to
It's an experimental form. There in contemporary photography, there are many forms being used now. You know, even Gursky manipulates his large format frames, or Jeff Wall does all these constructed photographs. So I think there's so many languages now which are available to you. You can choose to use them, and it's just something which might work or might not work. And it's a complex exercise to, you know, when you try and construct a photograph, essentially you're constructing something visual. So no matter what I bring to that in my mind, if it doesn't work as a visual thing on its own, it doesn't work. So it's really, you know, it's very hard to do. And I'm not saying what I do works, but I'm just saying it's a challenge to the self. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. But if you feel like doing it, it's just something which is available to you today.
nothing against it?
Yeah, no, it's just something available to you. And I think I encourage everybody to experiment. There's no harm doing it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You know, the last year or so, I just find that as far as the media is concerned or public discourse is concerned, there seems to be very little happening in terms of, you know, one is to hear about global warming and environmental issues. They somehow seem to have either disappeared or at least diminished. What would be your take? And it confuses me why, you know, because I'm sure it's not that those issues have gone away.
I think now got it to go over.
So, no, it doesn't seem to be only for the Indian media, it seems to be
Well,
internationally so.
in a sense, the recession took over.
And in such a space and at such a time, you as an environmentalist and not necessarily the photographer, so how would you feel about that?
I think these issues which might disappear from the public newspaper headline now and then, which is how you might perceive them, but they are very present. There's a Rio Plus 20 happening next year. There are hundreds and thousands of very important conversations around this. Very important things happening on solar energy, for example. And so these things keep on going on. And if you're then working in that area, you just keep on. It's not only about what happens in the public space. But as I said, the recession took over in Europe, you know, and in the US. So that really changed the way people, because a lot of the issues require investment. You know, Germany, for example, said no more nuclear plants, and they said we are going to do solar, and they have a very strict law on solar. Everything takes money. So, no, people don't have money nowadays too, so they don't want to talk about it. But these are things which will just go on, I think. In India too, they are going on. But there's so much else to read about.
I'm just wondering if it's, you know, as an environmentalist, you feel down?
No, well, either a photographer or an environmentalist, I cannot feel down. You just, like, you know, if you do a show, if it's not well received, you don't stop doing it. It's something you do. That's it. Because that's what you want to do. So it doesn't really matter. Yeah, right. So many things hurt. So when it hurts because it matters to you. No, don't you think? Hi.
As part of Toxic Links, obviously you're involved with so many things that are happening. Now, does everything become a photography project? Do you consciously say, no, I'm not going to involve myself as a photographer in this? How do you do it? I mean, what do you decide? How do you go about, you know, is it a visual thing? Is it a sense of involvement in the project? Is it how long you think you're going to be involved with that, or what is it?
So actually, I think the connection is only me. As I said, photography led me back to what I wanted to do in a sense. So there is really no connection of form in the two. There might be connections of concern of what draws you to something, but photography is a visual medium. Full stop. You know, for me, it's first and foremost the visual medium. Everything else is secondary. And Toxic Link is a campaigning. It's a completely different way of doing it. But photography projects cannot be taken casually. So you have to really feel you want to do that. And that's something else, I think. And you know that better than, you know. So it's read together because I do both these things, so you want to, in some ways, yes, because I'm concerned about ideas of nature and it takes me to some of the work I'm doing now. But for example, the Capital in Transition series, it's not really an ecological, in a fixed sense. It could be dealing with some larger issues of ecology, yes, or environmental histories. But they don't really come together in a sense. So if the photograph has to work, it has to work on its own, I think.
But if you think that a certain project is helped by the photography, it may not be aesthetically what you think it is to be, would you then take that leap? Sure.
So Toxic Link has a huge library of photographs, not one of them is mine. So I'm just not unable to contribute like that. It's just very hard to do that. And it may or may not work in that way of illustrating something, or may not be the best of illustrating something.
You mentioned that the vultures have been decimated
Yeah.
to a very low population, and you mentioned that the drug involved in milk enhancing is diclofenac.
Yeah,
Diclofenac, if I understand, also as a
painkiller.
anti-inflammatory and painkiller for humans, right?
Yeah.
So is there a way for the government or anybody like the cattle industry to not use this substance? And also, is there a way by the government or the forestry department or wildlife department to have conserve and preserve for vultures and any other?
So there was a big debate around this because firstly, then, as what happens is if it's an industrial product, nobody wants to believe it's causing any harm. And this is marketed by a very large company, international company. And ultimately the Prime Minister said, what's the debate? Let's just ban it. So they banned it for livestock. You can still buy, you can buy for yourself. But there has been some reports of some revivals of vultures, but it's a 97% decimation of 3 species of vultures. It's completely tragic. It's all over South Asia, actually.
Hi, I was very excited when I heard your environment is I love the outdoors. And one thing I was expecting is something along the lines of Ansel Adams, where he takes the pictures to capture the larger imagination, and then helps pass influences at least laws or starts clubs or helps clubs like the Sierra Club. What's your take on that approach to get the larger public?
Happening. Now, does everything become a photography project?
No.
You consciously say, no, I'm not going to involve myself as a photographer in this. How do you do it? I mean, what do you decide? How do you go about, is it a visual thing? Is it a sense of involvement in the project? Is it how long you think you're going to be involved with that? Or what is the...
So actually I think the connection is only me. As I said, photography led me back to what I wanted to do in a sense. So there is really no connection of form in the two. There might be connections of concern of what draws you to something, but photography is a visual medium, full stop. For me, it's first and foremost the visual medium. Everything else is secondary. And Toxic Link is a campaigning. It's a completely different way of doing it. But photography projects cannot be taken casually. So you have to really feel you want to do that. And that's something else, I think, and you know that better. So it's read together because I do both these things. So you want to, in some ways, yes, because I'm concerned about ideas of nature, and it takes me to some of the work I'm doing now. But for example, the Capital in Transition series, it's not really an ecological, in a fixed sense. It could be dealing with some larger issues of ecology, yes, or environmental histories. But they don't really come together in a sense. So if the photograph has to work, it has to work on its own, I think.
But if you think that a certain project is helped by the photography, it may not be aesthetically what you think it is to be, would you then take that leap? Sure.
So Toxic Link has a huge library of photographs, not one of them is mine. So I'm just not unable to contribute like that. It's just very hard to do that. And it may or may not work in that way of illustrating something, or may not be the best of illustrating something.
You You mentioned that the vultures have been disseminated
Yeah.
to a very low population, and you mentioned that the drug involved in milk enhancing is diclofenac.
Yeah.
Diclofenac, if I understand, also as a
Painkiller.
anti-inflammatory and painkiller for humans, right?
Yeah.
So is there a way for the government or anybody like the cattle industry to not use this substance? And also, is there a way by the government or the forestry department or wildlife department to have conserve and preserve for vultures and any other?
So there was a big debate around this because firstly, then, as what happens is if it's an industrial product, nobody wants to believe it's causing any harm. And this is marketed by a very large company, international company. And ultimately the Prime Minister said, what's the debate? Let's just ban it. So they banned it for livestock. You can still buy, you can buy for yourself. But there has been some reports of some revivals of vultures, but it's a 97% decimation of 3 species of vultures. It's completely tragic. It's all over South Asia, actually.
I was very excited when I heard your environmentalist who love the outdoors. And one thing I was expecting is something along the lines of Ansel Adams, where he takes the pictures to capture the larger imagination, and then helps pass influences like these laws or such clubs or helps clubs like the Sierra Club. What's your take on that approach to get the larger public involved, not on a case-to-case basis, but just capture the larger imagination?
Yes, I'm totally flattered. You expected Ansel Adams.
Something along those lines.
Thank you, but of course not. I have a little, so Ansel Adams came from just to certain view of American environmentalism of this pure nature. Here nature issues tend to be very more complicated because about the social ecology of nature, the people involved in it. So I really don't see this very beautiful pictorial landscape as something which draws me, and hence my work tends to be a little more rough in a sense. I think that's it's really who you are is what you photograph, and he is of course the great master without anything else being said. It doesn't matter what he was shooting; anything he would have shot would have been that great, I think.
I think from a photography and an environmentalist perspective, it just was a very different approach in trying to get similar goals of protecting the environment.
Yeah. And we are people, I mean, no comparison, but we are people in different times and different societies and different engagements, I guess.
Okay. Your question then? Smart pass mic, I guess.
I've seen some of the use of the mannequins, and you're trying to draw some relation using human bodies and trying to externally relate. And sometimes you're using multiple, maybe mannequins or people within the pictures. So are those set of pictures is like trying to form a self-expressionist form of an art, or like what exactly is it oriented towards?
I leave this term to the art writers and the art, but
I want to know
I'm
your
just telling
take.
you my side, I can tell you my take.
Yeah, what's your take?
So I don't know how you categorize it. Or I was very fascinated. This mannequin I came across when I was walking the junk market, and I saw this very lifelike mannequin, almost human. And mannequins have this thing, they're human, but they are part of the industrial regime in a sense. They're human. It's also a comment on the body, industrial body, our bodies, of who we are, as products of certain kinds of times of society. So I like that reference nicely. I mean, it's not a new reference, but I like that idea in which this lifelike thing is actually not lifelike, but made from industrial machine. And so those are ideas I played around in those. I've done 3 or 4 works of mannequins, and this particular one was the same. I mean, I don't know to describe it, but is that answer your question?
No, I want to know the description. That is the answer.
Of this photograph?
Maybe you can show some more of the
I
photographs.
don't have them, so, but I can exchange them with you and show them and send them to you tonight.
All right. And what's like where you using human body, like live human body? I saw some of your pictures, maybe a kind of a library where certain reflections were also there, and also one picture in which you were trying to draw a relation of some electricity tower, and so that is where you're using human body, not mannequins. Why so? Why do you really choose to go to human bodies there?
I really don't describe pictures, but you can read it. It's these are all the body you see are my body actually. So these are self-portraits of sorts. But essentially, when you go into visual medium, if I said anything about it, it's your picture as well as mine after I made it. So if it doesn't work for you, it's fine.
One last question.
So, art directed pictures which you create, are they for a particular audience and the other ones for a particular audience, or you show all your pictures to everybody?
I think today, if you're talking about the art galleries, you can show anything. You can show pure, Janita does the pure classical form. Pushpala does the constructed, the self-portraiture or the studio form. You can show everything. This is what I'm saying. Today, in the language of photography, everything coexists. It's not that one is different, better than the other. Essentially, it's the quality of the work. And it doesn't really matter what kind of it, it has to work as something. So you're completely challenged and free to use anything you want. You can have this pure, the Venice Biennale had Janita's photographs of of her office series. This is straight photograph, I mean not straight, but they're pure black and white photographs, Nothing else, there's no other. So you don't have to do anything. If the work has that quality, it will circulate. And today, the debate is, I think, completely over. Sunil Gupta does both things. He does pure, he also does diptychs, he does. So Prashant and Dinesh do mostly pure photography. His home series is this, so they've been shown all over. So it's just anything which works as a visual something.
I'm trying to understand when you're creating awareness for the masses and for the classes. So there's a certain kind of audience which goes to museums and all of that.
That's true.
And there's a certain kind of audience which would relate to the pure photography and they wouldn't relate to the otherwise and vice versa. So when you're showcasing for awareness, do you mix both work or you purely show the pure work?
See, it's a complicated question because you can even what you call pure photography, I suspect you mean documentary photography. That's also really complicated now, because how do you know what's the true documentary photograph? How do you know somebody's not? There's so many scandals now, people having touched photographs and done things. Even earlier, I think it's Robert, Kapa's photograph of that, Spanish soldier. It's a constructed photograph. Not true?
No, that's not.
That's what people less do.
Okay, so that's a rumor. That's what I read. I could be wrong. So it's really, if it's not, it's some photograph. Huh? Yeah. So it's really because of this truth claims about photography have been contested now. And of course, they continue in some ways, but you even see things in newspapers which are photoshopped or touched up or something. So if you're looking for a truth claim in photography, you're in very slippery ground today. There's this group in Lebanon called the Atlas Group, which does fictional archival work. So they created this whole fictional work of people betting when cars were being blown up in Lebanon. It's completely fictional. And it seems completely real. It seems like a real archive, that you feel that this is real. It's completely fictional. So you are on very sort of, the truth claims are really, really difficult to establish now. So representation issues become very important. And this is really where you get the space to operate also, simultaneously. I mean, what is true is a question today. Like somebody said, the Chinese, you were talking about many perspectives, and there was a friend, William, thing. I mean, you can have so many perspectives in the same way, and they're both true in a sense, in a simple sense. So I really feel, this is my view, and I think some people feel that truth claims of documentary are contestable, though the documentary medium is still a very powerful medium because you want to believe it also. You know, the first thing when you see newspaper photograph, you will believe it. You won't say, oh, is it true or not true? So it's that believability you bring to it, I think. But yeah, that's the second part of the question is true, that some forms work better in gallery spaces than in other spaces. So they will work in a certain gallery context better. And you probably will not see them circulated around so much. It's true.